My parents saw me only as a janitor and not as a son, but when I left them, they came to ask me to fix the roof. My name's Kevin, I'm 29, and I've been the invisible son in my family for as long as I can remember. And by invisible, I don't mean I was neglected in the tragic movie of the week kind of way. No, I was just useful, like a wrench, something you reach for when you need to fix something, then toss back in the drawer until the next time. Growing up, I had an older brother named Travis and a younger sister named Lauren. Travis was the golden boy, varsity everything, voted homecoming king, fast-tracked straight into dad's approval like he was born with a user manual labeled pride of the family. Lauren was the delicate creative. She painted, wrote poetry, played the piano like a child prodigy. Everyone coddled her. She cried once when her goldfish died and got a full week off from chores. I once dislocated my shoulder falling off the garage roof and was told to walk it off. And then there was me, Kevin. Good ol' Kevin, who fixed the Wi-Fi. Kevin, who figured out why the car made that weird noise. Kevin, who installed the new dishwasher and who got grounded for not doing his geometry homework while trying to patch a leaking pipe in the basement. Kevin, who no one hugged unless they were crying about someone else. It's not like I was talentless. I was just useful. I learned to fix things early on, mostly because no one else wanted to, and someone had to. I remember being 10 years old, lying under the kitchen sink with a flashlight in my mouth and my dad standing over me asking if I knew what I was doing. I didn't, but I figured it out because that's what I did. Holidays? I was the one untangling the lights while Travis posed for photos. Lauren would swoop in with a handmade ornament and get praised like she'd resurrected the spirit of Christmas itself. Meanwhile, I was on a ladder, putting up wreaths in 30-degree weather while Mom yelled out from inside that I was bending the branches wrong. At school, I wasn't failing, but I wasn't an overachiever either. I didn't get into fights, didn't win awards, didn't embarrass the family. I just existed. I fixed things, carried heavy stuff, and made sure the remote batteries were changed before Dad yelled about the damn clicker not working again. The first time I realized I was just a tool to them was when Travis was moving into his dorm. Everyone was emotional. Mom was crying. Dad had that stoic man nod going on. Lauren made a scrapbook of memories. And me? I was the one who spent 3 hours setting up Travis's futon, wiring his gaming setup, and rearranging furniture while they all sat around talking about how proud they were. I don't think anyone even said thank you. I was just expected to do it. Like it was instinct, like plugging in a lamp. It didn't stop when we got older. Travis blew out his ACL playing recreational flag football in his mid-20s and got babied like he'd survived war. I had all 4 of my wisdom teeth removed and drove myself home from the oral surgeon because Mom and Dad were busy helping Lauren finish a gallery submission. I bled through my shirt in the car and had to stuff toilet paper in my mouth because I didn't have gauze. I guess what really made it all click was what happened last Thanksgiving. I'd already bought everything for dinner. Turkey, stuffing, the works. I'd deep cleaned the house, even fixed a leak in the guest bathroom 2 days before everyone was supposed to come over. Travis showed up an hour late with a bag of chips. Lauren didn't show up at all, claiming she was emotionally drained from creating, and my parents? They came, ate, complimented the cranberry sauce, and left early to go see a movie together, without inviting me. They didn't even take leftovers. Later that night, I was standing in the kitchen alone, elbows deep in dirty dishes, when I realized I hadn't sat down to eat. I'd been refilling glasses, checking the oven, slicing bread. I heated up a plate, sat down at the table, and ate cold turkey and mashed potatoes by myself. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin itch. I thought back to every family event I could remember. Every birthday where Travis got new sports gear and Lauren got art supplies, and I got a generic card with $20 in it, which was usually borrowed back by Mom for groceries. Every school award I got for attendance or perfect homework submission that got brushed off because Travis made the honor roll again, or Lauren's poem got published in the school paper. Even when I got my first real job as a facilities technician for a big corporate building, my dad just said, "At least it's honest work," while scrolling through his phone. "No, we're proud of you." No family dinner. I fixed their air conditioning 3 times last summer, and the only thing I got was a lukewarm bottle of water and a hope it holds through the heat wave. And yet, they call me first when their phones won't charge or their printer jams. I've set up 4 TVs for them in the last 5 years. When Laura needed shelves hung for her home studio, I drove across town and spent 6 hours measuring, drilling, and mounting. She texted me a week later to say one shelf looked crooked. That was the entire message. The thing is, I don't hate them. I really don't. I just think they don't see me. Not really. They see what I do for them, what I fix, what I carry, what I handle so they don't have to. I stopped answering their calls a couple months ago. Not because I'm angry, but because I'm tired. I moved to a new place. Nothing fancy, Just a small duplex with a garage and a quiet neighborhood. I didn't tell anyone I was moving. They still haven't asked. Sometimes I think about what it would be like if the water heater exploded or their router died and I wasn't there to fix it. Would they finally miss me? Or just call a handyman? I don't know what it says about me that I still kind of hope they call. Not to ask me for help. Just to say, "Hey Kev, how are you doing?" But I'm not holding my breath. I think the moment everything really crystallized for me was when I was 10 years old. It was spring, and my parents had won this trip to Florida through some kind of work raffle or promotional giveaway. They were ecstatic. Dad couldn't stop talking about how it was this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. All expenses paid. He kept saying like it was some prize he'd earned himself through sheer charm and luck. For a week straight, the house buzzed with the excitement of the upcoming trip. Travis was bragging about riding roller coasters. Lauren was practicing what outfits she'd bring and what pose she'd do for pictures with the princesses. And me? I was sitting there trying to figure out if I had misplaced the permission slip or missed a conversation. Surely I was going too, right? No one ever said it directly. There was no family meeting, no gentle letdown. Just casual references to the three of us going and my mom offhandedly telling me to remind Grandma about my bedtime routine. That was the first real clue. At first I thought maybe they were just planning it in phases or trying to surprise me somehow. But the day the suitcases came out and Travis's and Lauren's were lined up by the door, I realized the surprise was that I wasn't going anywhere. I finally asked, timidly, not even angry, just confused. "Wait, I'm not going." My mom gave me this tight-lipped smile, like she was being inconvenienced. "Kev, honey, we'd love to take you too, but it's just not in the budget this time." We had to make a choice. Make a choice. Like choosing between cereal brands or picking out a restaurant. Not a conversation about which child might carry the most lifelong trauma from being left behind while the rest of the family went to see the Magic Kingdom. They dropped me off at Grandma's house the night before the flight. I didn't cry, not then. I sat in her living room pretending to be excited about playing cards and helping her bake cookies. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd done wrong. What made me the one they left behind? The kicker was when they came back. Everyone looked sunburned and happy, full of stories about rides and characters and fireworks. Travis showed me a video of him on Space Mountain while laughing and saying, "You would have been too scared for this anyway." Lauren gave me a detailed breakdown of every dessert she tried and how she hugged Goofy twice. And then Mom handed me a plastic bag with a souvenir in it. A keychain shaped like Mickey Mouse, still with the $5 price tag hanging off the side. I think she thought the price tag made it look more legitimate, like, "See? We thought of you." As if that little dangling sticker was supposed to mean something. Later that night, when I went to brush my teeth, I overheard them talking about the trip. Dad mentioned how the room they stayed in at the resort had 3 large beds. Not 2. Not one king-sized bed for the parents and a pull-out for the kids. 3 actual beds. That's when it all settled into place. They hadn't left me behind because there wasn't room. Or because of some budget problem. That was just the excuse that sounded easiest. They left me behind because I was the easiest to leave. I still have that keychain. Not because it meant something good, but because it was the moment I stopped making excuses for them in my head. I keep it in a box with other little reminders of how things were. And every time I see it, I remember the way they smiled when they came back. Like nothing was missing. Like I wasn't missing. By the time I was 13, I had already learned how to strip and replace electrical wiring, fix leaking pipes, and reboot the entire heating system in the house. Not because I was some kind of prodigy, not because I had a mentor guiding me through it, but because no one else was going to do it. Things broke, and when they did, the expectation was always the same. Kevin will handle it. I didn't grow up with toys or hobbies the way my siblings did. Travis got his varsity football uniform custom fitted, even though he was still growing. Dad bought him cleats that cost more than my winter jacket. Lauren had a beautiful classical guitar and weekly lessons with a private tutor. She was driven to ballet twice a week and signed up for every art workshop she ever showed interest in. Me? I was handed a hammer and a set of keys at 12. No ceremony. Just a casual, "You'll need these if anything comes up while we're out." And that was that. That was my toolkit, my after-school program, my extracurricular activity. A hammer and a responsibility to keep the house from falling apart when no one else wanted to bother. I still remember asking, just once, if I could join the after-school science club. It wasn't even expensive, like $40 for the semester. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd say yes. Science was the only subject I really loved, and I figured if I had something to look forward to after class, I could deal with the rest. But Dad barely looked up from his laptop. "You want us to pay for something like that when we already have a house that needs work?" he said. "If you're so into science, figure out how to fix the water heater." So I did. I read manuals. I watched YouTube videos late at night with the sound turned down low. I took apart old appliances from the garage and practiced putting them back together. I learned by trial and error, by burning my hand on exposed copper and shocking myself more times than I care to admit. I started carrying a multi-tool in my backpack and keeping duct tape in my school locker, just in case. While other kids were learning to code or paint or kick a ball across a field, I was soldering broken connections on the fuse box. It would have been easy to be bitter. And maybe I was, a little. But mostly, I was determined. I figured if no one was going to teach me how to survive, I'd teach myself. I couldn't count on anyone else. Not for support, not for encouragement, not even for a ride home if it rained. But I could count on my own two hands, and I made sure those hands knew what they were doing. By 8th grade, the teachers at school were telling my parents I had a talent for engineering, that I should be encouraged to explore it more seriously. They nodded politely during conferences, and then at home told me that unless I could fix the brakes on Dad's truck or install Lauren's new ceiling fan, I could forget about playing inventor. I did both. That week, I didn't quit. I never have. I kept learning, kept building, kept fixing. Because even if they didn't believe in me, I knew what I could do. And I knew that one day, they'd need me again, probably to unclog a drain or rewire a socket. But they'd still never ask what I actually wanted to do with my life. Just as long as I kept the lights on. I still remember the day I took second place in the regional school science competition. It was a big deal for me. I had stayed up late for weeks designing a simple but functional water filtration system using materials I scavenged from old plumbing parts and plastic bottles. My science teacher had encouraged me to submit it, said I had real potential. I even got a printed certificate and a small medal. The kind of thing kids usually hang up on their bedroom wall or show off to their proud parents after the ceremony. Mine didn't even show up. They were busy, of course. Lauren had a rehearsal for her school play. Not even the actual performance, just a rehearsal. I remember standing on the edge of the auditorium stage, medal around my neck, scanning the crowd, even though I already knew there was no one looking back at me. My teacher took a photo for me with a disposable camera, probably because she felt bad. I walked home alone, holding the certificate like it might mean something when I got there. It didn't. When I came through the door and said, "Hey, I got second place," Mom didn't even look up from the grocery list she was scribbling. "That's nice, honey," she mumbled. Dad just asked if I remembered to reset the circuit breaker in the garage because the freezer tripped again. I stood there for a second, still in my dress shirt, medal in my hand, wondering how it was possible to feel so unimportant in your own house. But when Travis failed, oh, that was different. I remember when he tried out for varsity basketball and didn't make the cut. My parents acted like someone had died. Mom blamed the coach for being too political and said Travis had too much heart for that kind of system anyway. Dad bought him a milkshake and said sometimes setbacks build character. They made it sound like some cosmic injustice, like the universe had robbed their golden boy of a future in the NBA. When Lauren had an anxiety attack before one of her piano recitals and couldn't perform, they bought her flowers anyway and told her it was brave just to try. She didn't even go on stage, but she was still treated like a champion. When I succeeded, no one noticed. When I failed, it was entirely my fault. One time the kitchen sink backed up while I was at school, and by the time I got home, Dad was already fuming. "What did you do?" he barked, standing there with his sleeves rolled up and a wrench in his hand. I told him I hadn't touched anything. I hadn't even been there. He didn't care. "Well, it didn't clog itself," he snapped. That was the standard. If something broke, it had to be me. If a remote went missing, I moved it. If the internet glitched, I messed with the settings. If the air conditioning stopped working, I did something weird with the thermostat. There was no room for neutrality. In their eyes, if something went wrong, the invisible sun must have caused it, even if the invisible sun hadn't been home in 2 days. And when I wasn't being blamed, I was simply forgotten. No one asked how I was doing in school unless I had a bad grade. No one asked what I wanted for my birthday unless it involved something practical like a tool or a flashlight. One year, they forgot altogether and just gave me $20 from the glove compartment while we were on our way to one of Travis's track meets. Invisible, until needed. That was my place. If I made them look good, I was background support. If I embarrassed them, I was a problem. If I accomplished something, it was quietly dismissed. But if something went wrong, well, then suddenly, everyone remembered my name. I used to wonder if they saw me at all, or if they just saw a shape that moved and fixed things and made their lives easier. A shape that didn't talk back, didn't ask for much, didn't need a medal or a milkshake or flowers. Just the occasional, "Can you take a look at this?" before fading back into the walls. After high school, it became even more obvious how different the rules were for me. Travis got into a well-known private university out of state, and my parents didn't hesitate to pay for it. Full tuition, housing, meal plan, the works. They even bought him a car, nothing fancy, but it was reliable and clean and had Bluetooth. Lauren didn't go to college right away. She was exploring her creativity, as Mom put it, bouncing between short-term art courses and workshops in New York. They covered her rent while she found herself, paid for her supplies, and even sent her money for emotional days when she said she just couldn't bring herself to go outside. Me? I was working 60 hours a week doing residential renovations for a guy I'd met at a hardware store. He offered me $10 an hour and all the leftover materials I could haul away. I took it without blinking. I was 18, broke, and living in a studio apartment that barely fit a twin bed and a microwave. There was no kitchen. I showered at the gym, slept next to my toolbox, and rationed cans of beans like I was in a survival bunker. No one offered to help. No one even asked how I was managing. My parents knew where I lived. They saw the way I had to wedge a fan in the one cracked window just to breathe in the summer. But no one came by. No one called to check in. They figured I was fine, because I always had been. Because I knew how to fix things. When I told them I was starting my own handyman business, I got a thumbs up emoji from Travis and a just be careful with taxes from Dad. That was it. No startup loan. No offer of an old vehicle. Not even a recommendation to their friends. I printed flyers on the printer at the public library, because I didn't own one. I left them at gas stations and taped them to utility poles until the glue stuck to my fingers. My first real job came from a guy who needed a fence repaired and liked that I showed up early with a handwritten quote. I reinvested every dollar. Bought used tools, fixed them up, then used them to fix something else. My apartment was more tool shed than living space. I slept on a mattress on the floor, surrounded by paint cans, drills, and extension cords. I'd spend the day hauling lumber and the night scrubbing caulk off my hands so I wouldn't stain the sheets. If I didn't eat breakfast, I could afford gas. If I skipped lunch, I could pay for better sandpaper. There was no backup plan. No safety net. I didn't have anyone to call if a job went south or a client ghosted on payment. Every mistake came out of my pocket. Every delay meant fewer groceries. I learned how to stretch $20 for a week and how to get enough calories from discount protein bars to keep going. Meanwhile, Lauren was posting filtered photos of cafe lattes and gallery visits with captions like healing through expression. Travis was on spring break in Miami, funded by my parents, who proudly reposted his pictures with comments about how hard he was working. I was up at 5 every morning, hauling ladders onto the roof of a borrowed van, knowing if I didn't hustle, rent wouldn't get paid. But I didn't stop. I kept going, job after job, word of mouth growing, tools multiplying, name getting known. I built everything from nothing. No favors. No borrowed money. No family praise. Just sweat, silence, and a stubbornness they had mistaken for passivity. They never said, "We're proud of you." But that's all right. I wasn't building any of this for them. The first big job I landed was a full renovation of a dental office downtown. It was a sleek little place with outdated cabinetry, yellowed walls, and buzzing lights that gave off a faint smell of dust and neglect. The owner was this older dentist named Dr. Chun, quiet, precise, the kind of guy who noticed if a picture frame was off by half an inch. I spent 3 weeks on that project, sometimes working 16 hours a day, rewiring the lighting, installing new flooring, repainting every surface, and replacing the cabinetry with custom units I built from scratch in my tiny rented workshop. By the time I was done, the place looked like something out of a design magazine, modern, bright, and sharp. Dr. Chun was thrilled. He handed me a check with a small bonus written in and told me he'd already passed my number along to 3 other business owners in the plaza. That single job opened the door to half a dozen more. For the first time, I wasn't just scraping by. I was building something real. I walked out of that office covered in sawdust, exhausted, and smiling like a maniac. It wasn't just about the money. It was the validation. The proof that I could do more than patch leaky pipes and fix jammed doors. I could create something that lasted. And for the first time in years, I let myself think, maybe I could share this. Maybe, just maybe, they'd be proud. So I drove straight to my parents' house. I hadn't been there in a while, and part of me felt stupid pulling into that same cracked driveway where I used to fix their garage door and swap out their smoke detectors like a live-in tech support guy. But I was excited. Nervous, but excited. Inside, everyone was in the living room. Mom, Dad, Lauren, and of course Travis, who was holding court near the fireplace like he always did. There was this buzz in the room, this energy, and I thought for a second maybe it was for me. Maybe they already heard. But then I saw it. The keys on the counter, the shiny brochure on the coffee table, and the real star of the night parked outside. Travis had just bought a new Lexus. Mom was going on about the leather interior. Dad was impressed by the fuel efficiency. Lauren said it totally matched his vibe. They were passing his key fob around like it was a newborn. No one even noticed I had walked in until I said, "Hey, I finished my first full commercial project today. A dental office renovation." The client loved it. They all glanced over like I'd interrupted a movie. Dad gave me a nod. Lauren offered a polite smile. Mom didn't even pause from describing the sound system in Travis's car. Travis, still grinning like a guy in a dealership ad, chuckled and said, "Oh, you're still fixing stuff?" Still fixing stuff? Like I'd just unclogged a toilet or patched drywall for beer money. I stood there, waiting for someone, anyone, to ask a follow-up question, to show some kind of interest. But no one did. The conversation pivoted right back to extended warranties and whether Travis should get ceramic coating on the paint. I didn't stay long. On the drive home, I kept thinking about how I had imagined it would go. Not some dramatic group hug or applause, but maybe a "good job, Kev," or a "that sounds huge, tell us more." Just a few words to make me feel like I was more than the family handyman. But instead, all I got was a reminder. No matter how much I built, how far I came, or what I accomplished in their eyes, I'd always be the one in work boots, wiping his hands on a rag, standing in the background while someone else was celebrated. And I think that was the night I finally stopped expecting anything different. The funny thing about being the one who fixes everything is that it never stops with clogged drains or broken light fixtures. Eventually, people stop seeing you as just handy. They start seeing you as a safety net, as someone who'll always figure it out, who'll always come through. And when money started flowing a little better for me, that's exactly what I became. The guy everyone called when their world got a little uncomfortable. It started with Travis. His brand new Lexus, the one everyone had fawned over, got repossessed less than a year later. Turns out, he'd stopped making payments. Something about a billing error or a temporary dip in income, his words. I found out when he showed up at my place one night, red-faced and mumbling about credit scores and how the dealership screwed him. I didn't even ask questions. I paid off the balance, close to $4,000, to get the car back. He promised to pay me back in monthly installments. I never saw a cent, not even a coffee. Then came Lauren. She called me crying one afternoon, said she didn't know who else to turn to. She was pregnant. The father was an unemployed guy who played bass in some indie band that mostly just posted moody selfies and SoundCloud links. She needed help with prenatal care. Her insurance didn't cover enough, and she didn't want to ask mom and dad because they'd just freak out. So I stepped in, covered her appointments, prescriptions, ultrasounds. Over $2,000 by the end of it. No thank you card, no lunch, not even a "how are you doing?" Just more Venmo requests. And then the pandemic hit. Dad lost part of his pension when the markets tanked. Mom's consulting gigs dried up. They called me together one evening, like it was a formal request from a committee. Said they were a little behind on the mortgage and asked if I could just cover it for a month or two until things leveled out. That month or two turned into $1,200 every month, on top of my own rent, on top of my own bills, while my own work had slowed down. I never said no, not once, because somewhere deep inside me, I still thought maybe, just maybe, doing enough would earn their respect. That if I kept showing up, kept bailing them out, they'd finally look at me and see more than the kid who was good with tools. But nothing changed. Every time I helped, it was as if I'd just scratched another item off their list. No one ever called to say thank you. No one ever followed up. The only time I heard from them again was when someone else needed something. When I hinted, once, that I was stretched a little thin, that maybe someone else could handle the next emergency, Mom sighed and said, "You know we can't rely on Travis for that stuff." As if I was the designated alternative. As if it was my role to pick up the slack when everyone else stumbled. I wasn't a son to them. I was a resource. Reliable. Quiet. Always available. And somehow, still invisible. When my dad finally retired, I figured, despite everything, I should at least acknowledge the moment. Say what you will about him. The man worked for over 30 years at the same company, and that kind of consistency deserved some recognition. I gave him a call the week before, just to check in, to ask if there would be any sort of celebration. Nothing formal, just a simple, "Hey, are you guys doing anything for it?" He laughed a little and said, "Nah, just a small thing at the office with some coworkers. Nothing major." I remember that word. Small. He said it like the whole thing was low-key, not worth making a trip for. I even offered, awkwardly, to stop by or send something, and he told me it was fine, not to worry about it. "Really, Kevin, it's just a work thing. We'll do something later with the family, maybe." So I let it go. I had jobs lined up that weekend anyway. I figured if they wanted me there, they'd say so. But life has a weird way of showing you where you really stand. That Saturday, I happened to be driving across town for a supply run. I took a side street to avoid some construction, and I passed by the event hall near the old Civic Center. I wasn't even thinking about the retirement until I saw the sign. A massive banner stretched across the entrance gate, flapping in the breeze. "Congratulations, Martin," in bold, blue letters with gold stars. Balloons, streamers, even valet parking. The lot was full. I recognized half the cars, my aunt's red SUV, my cousin's pickup, even Lauren's little hybrid that she claimed always ran too hot for long drives. Tables with linen tablecloths were set up on the lawn, and I saw waiters in black vests walking around with trays. There was a sound system, someone giving a speech through a mic, and a cluster of people laughing near the entrance in their best-dressed clothes. And just like that, it hit me. This wasn't a small office gathering. It was a full-on retirement party. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. I parked across the street for a few minutes, engine idling, hands on the steering wheel. I didn't go in. I didn't want to make a scene or walk into something I clearly hadn't been invited to. Instead, I just sat there and watched. Later that evening, when I got home, I opened Instagram. I already knew what I'd see, but I checked anyway. Photo after photo. Travis raising a glass next to Dad. Lauren beaming in front of the buffet. A family group shot with the caption, celebrating the best dad and his amazing career. My cousins, uncles, aunts, people I hadn't seen in years. Even my parents' neighbors were there. There were 20 faces in that group picture. 20 people smiling under that banner, holding little plates of catered food and toasting to the man who had supposedly raised us all. I wasn't in a single frame. There wasn't even a mention of me. Not a tag, not a comment. Nothing. Not even a lie to cover it up. That was the moment. The culmination of everything. Years of being the helper, the problem solver, the silent fixer. Years of showing up when no one else did, of giving without being asked, of hoping for some kind of acknowledgement that never came. And when it came time for the family to gather, to celebrate the man I used to call Dad, they didn't even pretend I existed. They didn't forget me. They just chose not to include me. That evening, I was just wrapping up a long day. I'd been on site since morning, working through a kitchen remodel that had gone sideways thanks to a previous contractor cutting corners. I was exhausted, covered in drywall dust, and sitting in my truck eating a gas station sandwich that tasted like rubber and regret. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, and I picked it up without thinking, expecting maybe a message from a client or a supplier. It was from Travis. The crisis is over. He didn't come. I told you he wouldn't notice, LOL. For a second, I didn't understand. The message just sat there on my screen, glowing in the dark cab of the truck, mocking me. Then another message popped up, just seconds later. Oh, not you, forget it. I stared at those words for a long time. My thumb hovered over the reply button, but I didn't type anything. Because I didn't need to. I already knew what it meant. They had planned something. Some kind of gathering or event. Maybe the small office party that wasn't so small after all. And someone, probably Lauren, had raised the question of whether or not I'd show up. Travis had reassured them I wouldn't. That I never noticed these things. That I wouldn't come anyway. And they'd all moved on with their night like I was some distant obligation they'd successfully dodged. The worst part wasn't the mistake. It was that there was no panic in his follow-up. No apology. No sorry, man, wrong chat. With even a flimsy lie to soften the blow. Just that cold, casual forget it. Like it didn't matter. Like I didn't matter. Later, when I thought about it more, because of course I did, I realized what they meant. I'd heard bits and pieces of it before. The way they would joke about how I was all business, or how I only talked about work. Lauren once said, half laughing, that I was like a walking instruction manual, and Travis used to tell me to take the tool belt off once in a while. Apparently, I wasn't good company. Apparently, I ruined the atmosphere. Because I talked about job sites and inspections instead of concerts and beach trips. Because I had nothing to say about travel plans or wine pairings. Because my hands were rough, my shirts were faded, and my stories didn't come from college lecture halls or gallery openings. They came from crawl spaces and concrete slabs. And that was enough for them to leave me out. Not just tolerate me quietly. Not just roll their eyes and let me sit in the corner with a drink. No, they actively chose to exclude me. I put the phone down without replying. There was nothing else to say. They hadn't forgotten me. They had counted on it. That evening, I was just wrapping up a long day. I'd been on site since morning, working through a kitchen remodel that had gone sideways thanks to a previous contractor cutting corners. I was exhausted, covered in drywall dust, and sitting in my truck eating a gas station sandwich that tasted like rubber and regret. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, and I picked it up without thinking, expecting maybe a message from a client or a supplier. It was from Travis. The crisis is over. He didn't come. I told you he wouldn't notice, LOL. For a second, I didn't understand. The message just sat there on my screen, glowing in the dark cab of the truck, mocking me. Then another message popped up, just seconds later. Oh, not you, forget it. I stared at those words for a long time. My thumb hovered over the reply button, but I didn't type anything. Because I didn't need to. I already knew what it meant. They had planned something. Some kind of gathering or event. Maybe the small office party that wasn't so small after all. And someone, probably Lauren, had had raised the question of whether or not I'd show up. Travis had reassured them I wouldn't, that I never noticed these things, that I wouldn't come anyway, and they'd all moved on with their night like I was some distant obligation they'd successfully dodged. The worst part wasn't the mistake. It was that there was no panic in his follow-up. No apology. No sorry, man, wrong chat, with even a flimsy lie to soften the blow. Just that cold, casual forget it. Like it didn't matter. Like I didn't matter. Later, when I thought about it more, because of course I did, I realized what they meant. I'd heard bits and pieces of it before. The way they would joke about how I was all business, or how I only talked about work. Lauren once said, half laughing, that I was like a walking instruction manual, and Travis used to tell me to take the tool belt off once in a while. Apparently, I wasn't good company. Apparently, I ruined the atmosphere. Because I talked about job sites and inspections instead of concerts and beach trips. Because I had nothing to say about travel plans or wine pairings. Because my hands were rough, my shirts were faded, and my stories didn't come from college lecture halls or gallery openings. They came from crawl spaces and concrete slabs. And that was enough for them to leave me out. Not just tolerate me quietly. Not just roll their eyes and let me sit in the corner with a drink. No, they actively chose to exclude me. I put the phone down without replying. There was nothing else to say. They hadn't forgotten me. They had counted on it. The day everything truly ended wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with a fight or a slammed door. It came quietly, like a curtain being drawn in a room no one was watching. I had been planning to surprise my parents with a car. Not just any car. A fully restored '67 Mustang, midnight blue with chrome trim. It was a project I'd been working on in my spare time, quietly pulling it together piece by piece. I'd found the body rusted out in a scrapyard 2 towns over, and for over a year, I had been sanding, welding, replacing, rebuilding. I wanted to hand them something beautiful, something fast, and loud and whole. Something that said, despite everything, I still thought of you. But after the retirement party, after Travis's text, after years of being useful but never seen, needed but never wanted, I looked at that car differently. It wasn't a gift anymore. It was a monument to my own foolishness, to every time I had hoped they'd come around. So I canceled it. All of it. I stripped the Mustang for parts and sold them off piece by piece. The engine block went to a guy in Reno who was restoring his dad's old ride. The transmission, already polished and ready, ended up in a younger mechanic's weekend project. The seats, the dash, the wheels. I posted everything online, priced it fair, and made sure each part went to someone who'd appreciate it more than the people I was building it for. I took down the tarp, swept the garage, and when it was empty, I stood in the silence and whispered, let them find a tool for themselves now. I didn't tell anyone. A few days later, the call started. First it was Mom, chipper like nothing had happened. Hey honey, the disposal's acting up again. You mind swinging by this week? Then Dad. Kevin, the roof's got that weird creaking sound again. Think you could check it out? Travis texted me asking if I had any tips for a friend's HVAC unit, pretending it wasn't just a way to rope me in. They tried to pretend like nothing had changed. Like the last few weeks hadn't happened. Like the years before that hadn't happened. No one mentioned the party. No one mentioned the messages. They just acted like I was still there, ready to roll under their sinks or onto their roofs with a toolbox and a quiet smile. But I didn't answer. Not the calls. Not the messages. Not even the voicemails that slowly shifted from friendly to confused to annoyed. I ignored them all. I wasn't angry anymore. I was finished. And the silence I gave them back was the only thing I had left that they couldn't ask me to fix. After a few weeks of silence, the tone of the messages started to change. At first, they tried to play it casual, like we were just picking up where we left off, like nothing had happened. But when I didn't respond, the shift came fast. Mom was the first to pivot. She sent a long message late at night, one of those texts that takes up the whole screen. She said Dad's blood pressure had been acting up again, and that stress wasn't good for him at his age. She didn't say it outright, but the implication hung heavy in every word. The stress, of course, was me. My silence. My distance. He asks about you, she wrote. He's too proud to say it, but I know he misses you. Then Lauren chimed in. My son keeps asking when Uncle Kev is coming over, she wrote, like I was supposed to melt at the mention of a toddler I barely knew. He misses you. We all do. No mention of the months of silence. No acknowledgement of the parties or the texts that were never meant for me. Just a carefully chosen image of innocence, meant to tug at whatever part of me still cared. Even Travis gave it a try. Look, man, he wrote. Maybe you just overestimated the situation. We're family. Stuff gets messy sometimes. He made it sound like I'd misread a scene in a movie. Like I'd invented the years of being ignored, overlooked, used. But the worst part wasn't the guilt. It was how fast the guilt turned back into expectation. Because right after the soft words, the real messages came. We're repainting the house this spring. Could really use your expertise. Mom's car is acting weird again. Can you swing by? We're finally building that back terrace we talked about. Think you could help with the framing? Would be great to have someone we trust. No mention of payment. No offers of trade. No talk of time or cost. Just the old, familiar line. Family helps. I sat there reading those messages, one after the other, and realized they hadn't learned anything. They didn't miss me. They missed what I did. They missed the free labor, the convenience, the man who showed up with a drill and didn't ask for a thank you. The moment I stopped being available, I stopped being worth anything to them. And now, instead of apologies, they were offering veiled demands wrapped in sentimentality. I didn't respond. They wanted their tool back. But I wasn't on the shelf anymore. I was halfway through laying shingles on a 2-story house when I saw her. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The way the heat shimmered off the pavement, how tired I was. But no, there she was. My mother. Standing at the edge of the job site in sandals completely wrong for gravel, clutching her purse like she was about to deliver a sermon at a funeral. She didn't yell. She didn't wave. She just stood there until one of the guys on the crew called up to me, pointing. I climbed down the ladder slowly, wiping my hands on my jeans, already knowing this wasn't going to be a normal conversation. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just deflated. The kind of look someone wears when their plans haven't gone the way they expected. Her eyes were red, and she blinked too often. It was obvious she'd been crying. Before I could say anything, she spoke. How could you do this to your family? Her voice cracked on the word family, like she still expected it to carry weight. I didn't react. I just looked at her. I let the silence sit for a moment, let her feel the full emptiness of that question. And then I asked, as calmly as I've ever said anything in my life, to fix what exactly? She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She stared at me for a second, then looked down, as if the dirt and dust at her feet had the answer. The air between us was heavy, not angry, not hostile, just tired, like the final stretch of a plane no one was enjoying anymore. Then she finally said it. The water heater's leaking. We can't afford a plumber right now. And just like that, there it was. Not the apology, not the reflection, just another leak in another pipe. Another problem to pass off to me. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and handed it to her. Call this guy? His name's Dan. He's honest. He'll give you a fair price. She took the phone, barely looking at it. Her lips pressed together like she wanted to say something else, but nothing came. I turned, climbed the ladder, and went back to the roof. That was the conversation. No dramatic ending. No apology. No screaming. Just her on the ground with the number of someone else who could help, and me on the roof finishing a job that actually paid. 6 months later, my life barely resembled what it had been. I had 12 employees on payroll, a mix of carpenters, electricians, and guys I trusted to show up and do the job right. We weren't just patching drywall or fixing fences anymore. We were managing full-scale renovations, commercial builds, and city work. I bought a new truck, a real one this time, not some secondhand clunker with a prayer and rust under the paint. White, extended cab, my company logo on the side. Clean. Professional. Mine. We had just secured a tender for a city contract, retrofitting several municipal buildings for energy efficiency. Big money. Steady work. A project that would put my company's name on the map in ways I'd only daydreamed about while sleeping next to a bucket of paint cans in that old studio apartment. And through all of it, Megan stood by me. She was an architect. We met through a project where she'd been designing a mixed-use property and needed a contractor who wasn't going to cut corners. Someone recommended me. The first time we talked, she asked detailed questions about structural load and insulation ratings, and I remember thinking, finally, someone who actually understands what it takes to build something that lasts. We started dating a few months after that job wrapped. She was sharp, calm under pressure, and had this way of looking at blueprints like she could see the finished building already standing in front of her. She never treated my work like something beneath hers. She respected what I did. She got it. Her parents were engineers. The first time I met them, I was nervous, not because I thought I wouldn't measure up, but because I had no idea how it would feel to be in a room where people actually wanted to hear what I had to say. But when I told them about the city contract, about how I'd built my company from nothing, they didn't nod distractedly or change the subject. They asked questions. Real ones. Her dad even pulled out a notepad and jotted down some of my ideas for structural retrofits. By the end of the night, I'd had more genuine, respectful conversation around that dinner table than I'd had in my parents' house in 29 years. There was no guilt, no manipulation, no quiet expectation that I'd fix something before dessert. Just people who saw me as a man, not a resource. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But that's what a new life felt like. Peaceful. Solid. like standing on a foundation you'd poured yourself, knowing this time no one else could take the credit. The last message I ever got from my father came on a Sunday evening. I was sitting on the back deck of the house Megan and I had just moved into, drinking coffee and watching the sunset settle over the trees behind our yard. My phone buzzed on the table next to me, and for some reason, I looked. It was short. Simple. We can't afford to repair the roof. Please help us. That was it. No greeting, no preamble. Just a request, another leak, another problem, another expectation that I would drop everything, climb a ladder, and fix what they let rot. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because this time, I actually had an answer. I typed back. Not my problem anymore. About an hour later, he tried again. A longer message this time. He said he just wanted one day where the house didn't feel like a construction zone, that he was tired of living in a constant blue-collar atmosphere. As if all those years of me crawling under sinks and patching drywall had been some kind of aesthetic burden for him. As if my work, my life, my labor had been something to be endured. He wanted peace now. He wanted calm. But I had already closed that chapter. Long ago. Let them enjoy the atmosphere now. Under a leaky roof. I didn't respond again. And this time, it wasn't out of hurt or anger or a need to make a point. It was because I had finally understood something so basic, it should have been obvious all along. I was never the problem. I was just the one who kept fixing them. And I'm done fixing people who refuse to see you unless you're holding a tool. So that's it. That's the story. What would you have done? Do you think I was too harsh? Or was it time someone like me finally said no? I'd really like to hear your thoughts, whether you've been in my shoes or think I should have handled things differently. Let me know. I'm listening.